Imagine spending decades building a hospitality empire from the ground up, brick by brick, person by person, only to one day be treated like a trespasser in your own building. That's exactly what happened to Margaret Ellis, founder and CEO of the Ellis Hospitality Group. It had been one of those long, bone-deep kind of days. The kind that settles into your shoulders and creeps down your spine, stubborn and heavy. Margaret wasn't one to complain, though. At 63, she still worked harder than most half her age. That particular Thursday, she'd already driven over 180 miles, first visiting 2 properties in Savannah for morning site audits, then sitting through back-to-back meetings with regional leadership. But she wasn't done. She drove herself another 2 hours north, aiming to end the day with an unannounced walkthrough of the group's newest property, the Ashcroft Hotel, tucked right off Calhoun Street in Charleston, South Carolina. She arrived just past dusk. No assistant. No limousine. No press announcement. That was never her style. Margaret believed you couldn't really know how your hotel was operating unless you walked through the front door like any other guest. No red carpet. No heads up to staff. Just the raw, unfiltered guest experience. She didn't come dressed to impress, either. No heels. No designer bag. No tailored power suit. Instead, Margaret wore what she always wore when traveling alone, a charcoal gray hoodie zipped halfway, a simple pair of jeans, and her black walking sneakers. Her salt and pepper curls were pulled into a low puff, and her only accessory was a well-worn leather tote that held her license, a notepad, and the kind of business cards with no frills, just her name, title, and a phone number. As she stepped through the automatic doors into the lobby, the scent of fresh wood polish and lemon air freshener greeted her. The hotel looked sharp, clean marble floors, rich navy blue velvet couches, soft pendant lighting, and a wall of framed photographs showcasing Charleston's storied past. This was exactly the kind of atmosphere Margaret had envisioned when she first approved the design plans. Behind the reception desk stood a young man, maybe 22 at most, hair neatly parted, shirt tucked a little too tightly into stiff khakis. He glanced up just briefly, then quickly back at his computer screen. Margaret cleared her throat politely and smiled. "Hi there," she said, voice warm but clear. "I've got a reservation. Last name's Ellis." What followed was a slow unraveling, a quiet but unmistakable doubt in the young man's eyes, a tone that shifted from polite to guarded, and a decision made not by facts or credentials, but by appearances. Margaret had walked into her own hotel. But they didn't see a CEO. They saw a woman in sneakers. And just like that, the test had already begun. Margaret Ellis stood at the front desk, expecting a simple check-in. She had reserved a suite on the top floor, a room booked under a corporate block she herself had approved weeks ago. But the moment she gave her name, the energy changed. The young clerk's eyes flicked up from the computer screen, scanning her from head to toe. Not with curiosity. With skepticism. "What's the first name?" he asked, voice flat, fingers tapping quickly at the keyboard. "Margaret," she replied calmly. He frowned, eyes narrowing as he squinted at the monitor. I don't see a reservation under that name." Margaret nodded slowly, keeping her composure. "Try M. Ellis. It should be under a corporate block. Reserved suite, top floor." Click. Tap. Pause. "There's something here under an M. Ellis, but this is for a corporate suite," he said, tone tightening. "It doesn't look like it's for you." Margaret raised one eyebrow, though her voice stayed even. "What does that mean?" He hesitated. He clearly hadn't prepared for this kind of moment. "It's reserved for someone in the executive division," he said, dropping his voice like he was sharing a secret. "That's right," Margaret said, still calm. That would be me. The clerk blinked. You're with corporate. I am, she nodded. I'm the. Before she could finish the sentence, he interrupted. I'm going to have to call my manager. He turned away. No, welcome to the Ashcroft. No offer to take her bag. No courtesy. Just a quiet judgment that said, you don't belong here. Margaret glanced around the lobby. A couple seated near the fireplace turned to look, curiosity flickering in their expressions. A uniformed security guard shifted near the elevators, slowly walking toward the desk. The air in the room began to tighten, subtle, but unmistakable. The assistant manager emerged from the back. Tan slacks, burgundy blouse, clipboard in hand. She whispered something to the clerk, who motioned toward Margaret with a chin jerk. The manager stepped forward with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ma'am, she began, I understand you're trying to check into one of our corporate suites. I'm not trying, Margaret corrected gently. I am checking in. The reservation is under M. Ellis. That's a block I personally authorized. The manager folded her arms. And who exactly are you with? My name is Margaret Ellis, she said, voice firm but respectful. I'm the founder and CEO of Ellis Hospitality Group. A pause. A flicker of disbelief. Do you have any ID? Margaret handed her license and business card. The manager looked down, then back up, still unsure. And then came the line. The one Margaret had heard before. The one every seasoned executive of color, every woman in a male-dominated space, has heard in one form or another. You just don't look like a CEO. There it was. Not a question. Not even an insult. Just a quiet sentence packed with centuries of assumptions. And Margaret, standing in the hotel her company built, realized, this wasn't about a reservation. This was about recognition. Or the lack of it. Margaret Ellis had been underestimated before. Many times, in fact. As a woman of color in corporate America, she'd learned long ago that composure was her greatest weapon. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She simply stood there, firm, steady, and unshaken. The assistant manager, still unsure, handed back her ID and business card with a tight-lipped smile. If you wouldn't mind waiting by the window, I'll double-check a few things. Margaret didn't budge. I'll stand right here. The young man behind the desk was staring now, visibly nervous. A security officer lingered nearby, close enough to make his presence known, one hand resting just a little too near his belt, not on his weapon, but close enough to send a message. Ma'am, he said cautiously, is there a problem? Margaret turned to him with quiet authority. No. I'm waiting for your team to confirm the reservation I made under my own name, for the hotel I own. The clerk jumped in, speaking louder than necessary. She's trying to check into a corporate suite. Says she's the CEO. The security guard shifted, now more alert. Margaret could see it in his eyes, he wasn't sure if she was a guest, or a situation. Is there a reason, she asked calmly, why I'm being questioned by security for trying to check into a room that belongs to me? The manager disappeared into the back, muttering about needing to make a call. Margaret stood her ground. The silence in the lobby was growing heavier by the second. No one said it out loud, but everyone could feel something was wrong. Margaret reached into her tote and pulled out her phone. She dialed one number. No hesitation. Janet, she said, her voice low and clear. Call William Langston. Use the internal line. Tell him the Charleston property is mishandling a senior inspection. Yes. Right now. She ended the call and placed the phone back in her bag. Inside, behind the glass, the staff at the front desk were whispering, eyes darting nervously toward the window. The manager re-emerged, holding a phone in one hand and a printed sheet in the other. "Ms. Ellis," she said, voice a little too polite now, "I did see your name connected to the Ellis Group, but we typically require official confirmation from a corporate liaison." Margaret blinked, then smiled faintly. "Are you suggesting I forged my own reservation?" "And no," the manager stammered. "But showing up unannounced, dressed like, well, it's just not typical protocol." Margaret fixed her with a look that could part water. "Is it the lack of a memo that bothers you? Or the lack of a blazer?" Before the manager could respond, her office phone rang. She picked it up, turned pale, and quickly switched it to speaker. A voice cut through the air, sharp, unmistakable. "This is William Langston, Vice President of Operations. Who am I speaking to, and why is my CEO standing outside her own hotel?" The room went still. Margaret didn't have to say a word. She'd already taken control. The voice on the speakerphone was unmistakable, measured, crisp, and unmistakably in charge. "This is William Langston, Vice President of Operations. Who am I speaking to?" The assistant manager, pale now and fumbling, cleared her throat. "Pamela Jones. Assistant manager at the Ashcroft Hotel in Charleston." William didn't miss a beat. "Ms. Jones, why is the CEO of our company standing outside her own hotel? Why was she denied her suite and met with security?" Pamela glanced toward the lobby window where Margaret Ellis stood, composed but unrelenting. I wasn't sure it was really her." "And what gave you that impression?" William asked, his voice cooling with every word. "Her ID. The reservation under her name. The fact that her last name is literally on your paycheck." The front desk clerk, Brandon, stepped back like he'd just realized he was standing too close to the blast zone. William's voice didn't soften. "Tell me, Pamela, did she yell?" "No." "Did she threaten anyone?" "No, sir." "Did she do anything, aside from calmly asking for the room she rightfully booked?" Pamela swallowed. "No." "Good," William replied, pausing for emphasis. "Now you're going to walk outside, apologize to her directly, and do everything in your power to make this right. And you better pray she doesn't decide this is your last day in the hospitality business." The line went dead. For a moment, no one moved. Pamela stood there, frozen, like someone had just pulled the rug out from under her career. Brandon was visibly sweating, pretending to restack pamphlets he'd already organized. Even the security guard quietly drifted away, avoiding eye contact. Outside, Margaret stood like a lighthouse in a storm, unshaken. Pamela pushed open the glass doors and stepped out. Her voice trembled slightly. "Ms. Ellis. I want to sincerely apologize. There was clearly a misunderstanding. Your suite is ready now, and I'd be more than happy to." Margaret cut in, her tone measured. "You've confirmed who I am?" Pamela nodded. "Yes. I spoke with corporate." "No," Margaret corrected. "You spoke with William." Pamela's eyes flickered. "Yes, ma'am." Margaret let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Funny. 10 minutes ago, I was just a woman in sneakers who couldn't possibly belong here." Pamela opened her mouth to respond, but Margaret raised a hand. "I'm not in the mood for excuses. I'm in the mood for accountability." She walked back inside, calm as ever, the weight of the lobby's silence following her every step. Then another figure appeared, Julian Barrett, a senior operations director flown in from Charlotte. Sharp suit, firm handshake, and eyes that didn't miss a detail. "Margaret," he said, nodding. "You all right?" "They're learning," she replied quietly. He turned to the front desk. "Let's make a few things very clear to this team. This wasn't just about a suite anymore. It was about what happens when respect comes after recognition, and never before." And in that moment, no one in the lobby doubted who really ran the show. By sunrise the next morning, the ripple effects of what had happened at the Ashcroft Hotel had reached far beyond Charleston. Word traveled fast, faster than memos, faster than press releases. It traveled through people. Through whispers in hallways. Through group texts among hotel staff. And most importantly, through an emergency 7 a.m. corporate call that was mandatory for every general manager from Jacksonville to Washington, D.C. The message was clear. Our CEO, the call began, was profiled and denied access to her own suite. If it can happen to her, it can happen to your guests. If you cannot lead with integrity and respect, start packing your things. No sugarcoating. No dancing around the truth. Just a hard look in the mirror. At the Ashcroft, operations ground to a halt while staff regrouped. The assistant manager, Pamela, submitted her resignation 3 days later. Not because she was asked to, but because she finally understood the weight of what she had done. Her actions weren't just unprofessional. They were symptomatic of something deeper, a culture that judged first and asked questions later. Brandon, the young desk clerk, was placed on immediate probation. He was required to undergo full anti-bias training and shadow senior staff from other properties for retraining, not as punishment, but as a wake-up call. Margaret didn't believe in public shaming. But she did believe in accountability with a clear path to change. Security staff across the region were also reviewed. Not just in Charleston, but company-wide. Margaret made it clear, the job of security is to ensure safety, not to escalate based on appearance. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Margaret spent 3 more days at the Ashcroft, not in silence, but in motion. She didn't call the press. She didn't demand special treatment. She walked every floor. She ate breakfast in the lobby with regular guests. She spoke with the cleaning crew in the early morning and checked in with maintenance teams after dinner. Not once did she mention titles. She just listened. On Friday morning, she called for a staff meeting in the hotel's small conference room. No blazers. No PowerPoint slides. Just people. She stood at the head of the table and spoke softly but firmly, "This isn't about me being offended. I've weathered worse. This is about a culture that allows judgment to override professionalism." Housekeepers, bartenders, bellmen, they all sat quietly. Most hadn't been involved in the incident, but they felt its weight. One housekeeper, Loretta, who had worked there since opening day, raised her hand. "Miss Ellis," she said, "that ain't how we all are. I'm sorry they treated you that way." Margaret smiled, not out of satisfaction, but out of understanding. "I know, Loretta. And that's why I'm here. To make sure the good people don't get buried under the bad habits." The incident didn't end in scandal. It sparked reform. Because Margaret knew the truth, rooms can be cleaned overnight. But reputations? They take longer. By the end of the week, Margaret Ellis had become something of a legend, not because she raised her voice, but because she didn't have to. The video captured by a quiet employee, showing her being dismissed and doubted, had gone viral. But it wasn't her calm words or poised stance that stirred the public, it was what she represented. She was the woman who built something from the ground up, who walked through her own lobby and was told she didn't belong. She was proof that no matter how far you climb, someone will still measure you against the wrong standard. And when that happens, how you respond says everything. Margaret didn't burn the hotel down with rage or lash out on social media. She stood still, let the facts speak, and gave the people around her a chance to see their own reflection in the mirror. And that reflection wasn't pretty. What struck the staff the most wasn't the fallout, it was her restraint. She didn't demand special favors. She didn't drop names. She didn't say, "Do you know who I am?" Because to her, that was the problem. The idea that respect must be earned through recognition. That unless someone carries a title, wears a suit, or checks a box, they're less worthy of basic decency. Margaret stood before the staff in a final team meeting and said it plainly. "I didn't ask for special treatment. I asked to be treated like a regular guest. And somehow, even that was too much." She turned toward Pamela, the former assistant manager who had returned, not as a leader, but as a listener. "You still have a choice," Margaret said. "You can grow from this, or you can pretend it never happened. But you cannot do both." The room was quiet. Not out of fear. But out of something deeper, reflection. In the days that followed, Margaret didn't chase headlines. She didn't do interviews. She didn't write a statement. She didn't need to. Her silence had already echoed louder than outrage. What guests remembered wasn't the drama. It was the quiet authority of a woman who refused to shrink or perform. A woman who taught everyone in the building, from the kitchen staff to the executive suite, that real leadership doesn't strut, it stands still and lets the truth do the talking. She reminded them that respect isn't about wealth or wardrobe. It's about presence, kindness, awareness, and the courage to say, without shouting, "I belong here." And so does everyone else who walks through these doors. Because in the end, that's what Margaret Ellis stood for, not just a company, not just a brand, but a principle as old as this country itself. That dignity should never be earned through appearances. It should be granted through our shared humanity. As we get older, many of us have learned a simple truth: people will often judge you before they know you. By the way you dress. By how you speak. By what they assume you can't be. In Margaret Ellis's story, we see this lesson unfold with painful clarity, a woman dismissed not for anything she did wrong, but simply because she didn't look the part. It's a moment many older Americans recognize. Maybe you've walked into a room and felt overlooked because your title changed, your hair turned gray, or you stopped fitting the mold. But what Margaret reminds us is this: your value doesn't come from other people's recognition. It comes from your experience, your integrity, and how you carry yourself when tested. In a world that moves fast and judges quicker, the lesson is timeless: treat every person with respect, not because of who they might be, but because of who you are. Margaret didn't demand attention or retaliate with anger. She stayed calm. She stood tall. And in doing so, she held up a mirror to a culture too often driven by appearance instead of character. The takeaway: whether you're running a company or buying coffee at the corner store, lead with grace. Show up with quiet confidence. And never let someone else's short-sightedness make you question your worth. Because real dignity, the kind that matters, isn't loud. It doesn't beg to be seen. It simply walks in. And lets the room catch up.